What up YouTube? Intellect Joe back at you again for another video. Today what we're going to be doing is looking at nuts and bolts. So I'm pretty sure, for those of you guys that work on cars or bikes or whatever it is that you do, in the process of working on something, you might have A, snapped a bolt, using that torque wrench a little too freely, or B, maybe the bolt grew legs and walked away. Sometimes happens. Or you dropped one in there somewhere and now it's gotten away. So you're at the point where you need to get another bolt. And not only do you need to get another bolt, but you kind of want to make sure you get the right one. So in this video, what we're going to be doing is kind of going over how to identify a bolt, how to tell what material you need on the bolt, and how to tell the size and how to measure it really. So let's get into this one. So right off the bat, we're going to try to figure out what kind of bolt do we have. Is it metric or is it standard, right? Some bolts, as you see here, have markings on the head. This one looks like it has 6 lines. There's letters in the center. If you see here, if you look here, it says JH. That really has nothing to do with the size or strength or anything. So like I said, 6 lines, right? That's one example. 2 more numbers right there, like we were just talking about, 10.9. But then we also see the JH. So where is that? What is that? When you see a JH, or when you sometimes see letters, those letters are just referring to the manufacturer, whoever the manufacturer of the actual bolt is. So in this case, that's what that is, and the numbers there are the grade. JH, the slashes around are the grade. Here's another one, still numbers, but no longer is it a 10.9. It says 8.8. See, we had this one that said 10.9. This one says 8.8. Right? And then there's this guy. Remember we saw 6 lines here? This one only has 3. They're kind of laid down in the proper orientation already. Metric in my right hand, or standard. How do I know it's standard? Well, this isn't always true because some manufacturers are cheap and they stamp incorrectly on their hardware, but 98% of the time the stamps are pretty accurate. So we'll start off with the grade 8 here. Every time you see lines on a bolt like this, you automatically add 2 in your head, right? So there's grade 5, grade 8, grade 2. This one, if you do that method of adding 2, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 lines there. You add 2, that makes it a grade 8. We see this guy here, right? This one here's got 1, 2, 3 lines. You add 2, that makes it grade 5. Most of the time, if not all the time, anytime you see grade 5 and grade 8 bolts like this, they're standard, not metric. An 8.8, right, like this one does here, or a 10.9 like this guy does here. 10.9 being a higher number, that's like the equivalent to the grade 8. However, that's the metric one. 8.8, just like a grade 5, although yes, it's millimeters, not standard. So once again, to determine the grade in standard bolts, you look at how many lines are on the head. 6 lines, you're going to add 2 mentally, grade 8. This one, 3 lines on the head, you add 2 mentally, that's grade 5. Grade 5 being the weaker of the 2 and grade 8 being the stronger of the 2. There's also, like in these socket head cap screws right here, they say 12.9. So 12.9 is actually a higher grade than 10.9. So 8.8, 10.9, 12.9 being the strongest of the 3. Alright, so we figured out what grade we need. I have a grade 8 standard bolt. Now, what size is it? So, to figure out the size, without having any special tools, really just a tape measure, what we do is measure across the diameter of the bolt. Literally, just lay a tape halfway across the top and you'll figure out the size. In this case, we see it's 9/16. Metric, we know it's 10.9. What you can do is you do the same method, lay a tape halfway across the diameter, splitting it in half, right? Now, because it's metric, what we're gonna have to do is then convert. You can find that online. You can find out what fraction converts to millimeter. In this case, this one looks like 5/8. So 5/8 is like 16, closest to 5/8 is 16 millimeters. So now we know this is a 16 millimeter bolt, 10.9. I don't want to confuse you guys with grade 8, but 10.9 would be the equivalent to grade 8 if it were standard. Now we know 16 millimeter. How long is it? We measure it again, 3 inches. So the closest thing to 3 inches is probably going to be 16 millimeter by 75 mil. How do I determine the thread? Well, for standard, there's really mostly 2 options. It's regular coarse and fine. So quarter 20, quarter 28, for example. 5/16 18, 5/16 24, for example. The higher the number, the more threads per inch, meaning more bunched up, meaning a finer thread. Standard, measured for every 1 inch of thread, you would count that number of threads in it. Coarser thread, you're going to be more spaced out, less threads per inch. And that's only for applying to standard. When we get over to the metric stuff, there's coarse and fine, and sometimes there's like more of a middle number. For example, in 12 millimeter, there's 12 1.75, 12 1.5 or 1.50 or 150, and then there's 12 1.25. In metric stuff, the 1.5 or 1.75 or 1.25, that's the distance between the threads. So it's no longer measured per inch like standard would be, but more so the distance between each thread. Not everybody has a caliper, micrometer, or whatever to bust out and get measured in between each thread. But I mean, that's what you got King Bolt for. You go to King Bolt, I'll take care of you. I'll give you the bolt you need. If you're working on a Honda, Nissan, Toyota, for the most part, your bolt is probably going to be metric. If you're working on an earlier Ford, Chevy, Chrysler, whatever, earlier, maybe 60s, early 50s, earlier than that, for the most part, probably going to be standard. 80s, 90s is when most of the Chevys and American cars and Fords and all that all switched over to kind of having both standard and metric. And now, for the most part, most modern American cars, being Chevy, Ford, ATC, kind of all have metric on them as well. Not even hardly any standard. Less lines, weaker. More lines, stronger. Smaller number here, weaker. Bigger number, stronger. Measuring it, you always measure from under the head down because that's what's being used. You never really include the head because the head is always sitting on top just like that. If it's black or gold, that does not make it grade 8 automatically. And if all else fails and you can't figure out the size of your bolt, call 626-339-8400 and we'll go ahead and help you out. No, I'm just kidding. But anyways, so if you broke your bolt, lost your bolt, misplaced it, whatever, and you weren't sure what size you needed or what you had, if it was metric or standard, now I hope you kind of know, and I hope you kind of left with knowing a little bit more about bolts and kind of more of what you might need in case you find yourself needing hardware. Don't hesitate to ask me questions. My Instagram is in YouTube, and if you need anything, go ahead and let me know as well. So until next time, guys, I appreciate you. We'll see you on the next one. Peace.